The 2028 presidential election is still far away, but I am continuously developing new models to help me with my forecasting in the next 4 years. Hello everyone and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. Today I will be doing my latest 2028 forecast with the tickets that I actually think will end up being the nominees as of right now. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. I suspect that the Republican ticket will be J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio as vice president, and Pete Buttigieg will win the Democratic nomination with Wes Moore as his vice presidential pick. Given the electoral landscape of the 2024 presidential election, when Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris just a few months ago, we are heading into an environment where Democrats would expect it to be the favorites to win the 2028 presidential election given our hyper-polarized political environment. But with President Donald Trump's favorability rating slowly rising in the last couple of weeks since Liberation Day on April 1st, or April 2nd actually, we are currently waiting and we're looking at a potential, looking at the congressional vote as of right now. I believe this was for 2024 actually, but we clearly see that Donald Trump's approval rating is slowly closing in. The direction of the country is slowly going in the positive direction. It actually sharply went in the positive direction and is now slowly climbing back up once again. And so because of that, we are on pace to have Vice President J.D. Vance in a favorable position to win re-election. Now, the new election model that I created was based on this New York Times collection of different county types. So Trump counties that were won by over 20 points in 2020. On average, Trump ended up shifting them in 2024 by 2.7% on average. Biden won by over 20 points in 2020. Trump shifted those counties on average by 6.2%. Urban, suburban, over 90% white, all these different groups. I managed to create a model in Google Docs or in Google Sheets, which allows me to replicate this for the 2028 presidential election and even lets me affect the turnout numbers in certain areas. And this is what we'll be using to discuss the results. This is my average shift for the 2028 election. So for counties that Trump won by over 20 points, on average, they'd shift 1.5 points towards Buttigieg. Harris over 20 points. I'd expect those counties to shift back towards the Democrats. Urban centers, I think Vance would improve substantially in the urban centers, given the legislation that is underway, the cultural shifts, as well as voter registration. I think Republicans, especially somebody like J.D. Vance, would do significantly better in urban areas. Suburban areas, it's kind of a wash, but I expect on average Vance will improve very slightly. Counties that are over 90% white, you also have a variety of different shifts, but I think they'd probably shift back a tiny bit in favor of Buttigieg, just given that Trump had a very unique coalition of rural and suburban voters, and I don't even think somebody like J.D. Vance would be able to replicate that. I do think Vance will improve with minority voters. He will not gain as much with black voters as he would due to the fact that Wes Moore is the VP pick, and I would suspect if Pete Buttigieg were to be the nominee, he would end up picking Wes Moore as his vice presidential pick. The Hispanic trends would continue in all of the Hispanic counties that are over 25% Hispanic, over 50% college educated. I expect, Pete Buttigieg and Wes Moore to gain significantly in those counties. And I also see under anything that is under 20% college educated, Vance improving 3.5 points. Places with large plus 65 groups, Pete would improve massively. In voters that are younger, I think a 4.5 point shift would be there. J.D. Vance would get 75 million votes in the popular vote. Pete Buttigieg would get about 71 million votes in the national popular vote. Looking at the safe Republican states, we can see here that we'd have Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, so we could start filling these in on the map. Nebraska would actually not fall in the safe Republican category, we also have Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Missouri, Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, South Carolina, Florida. All of these states will end up being in the safe Republican column. However, if you actually notice here, this is something really interesting that I do want to point out to everybody. We can clearly see that Donald Trump, or at least JD Vance, would underperform the president in some places. So like, for example, in Kentucky, Vance only wins it by 27 points. Donald Trump in 2024 won the state by almost about 31. So you'd see that some voters that would only vote for Trump would kind of stay home. They wouldn't be these like huge defectors. Alabama actually gets more Republican. There wouldn't be like these huge defectors, but they would be present to an extent. You can actually see in the county or the state shift map that I actually have created for the 2024 to 2028 shift. The West Coast, Oregon and Washington barely move. Arkansas barely moves left. But you do see a lot of states in rural America that actually shift left. And this is because of Donald Trump's unique base. I don't see Vance being able to replicate that. I think some of those voters would stay home. Pete Buttigieg, I think, would do something better with some of these like slightly rural / suburban types, but I don't see him doing well in urban centers and with Black and Hispanic voters, hence why Florida, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, even Colorado and Illinois in certain places end up shifting back towards the Republicans. Alaska, I think, would also be in the safe column, as well as Hawaii. That would be safe Democrat. California, Oregon, Washington, these would all be in the safe Democrat column. California would get, however, would be significantly closer. We'd actually see Harris won it by 20 points in 2024. Pete's only winning it by 15. And this is mostly due to Hispanic voters moving into the Republican column. Oregon actually stays about the same. Washington barely ends up moving in the Republican direction here. You can clearly see on the shift map, it barely moves like even half a point to the right. So very stagnated in the Northwest, but California, Nevada, Arizona, you do see these massive shifts. In Utah even shifts right, believe it or not, in this, which would make sense because Pete Buttigieg being a homosexual presidential nominee, even with some of these shifts, for Democrats in Utah, I still think Vance would significantly improve in Utah because of that factor alone. Virginia shifts a little bit to the right. Maryland, a lot of the northeastern states actually end up shifting Republican because Vance would improve with his Catholic vote share. Looking at the likely Republican states, we can see here Iowa and Ohio, these would be a likely Republican on the electoral map, as well as Kansas. It is significantly closer than 2024, and Nebraska at large would also be closer than 15 points in this hypothetical matchup, with the first district being likely and Nebraska's second also being likely Democratic as well. Once again, Maine at large in this hypothetical matchup would be about a 7.4 percentage point win, which is slightly more Democratic than the Kamala Harris victory from 2024. Thus, it will be in the likely Democratic column, with Maine second being in the likely Republican column there as well. Looking at some other states, Colorado is a 9.5 point win for Pete Buttigieg. Again, you would see some leftward shifts in the suburbs, but Hispanic voters would continue to shift right in Colorado and would actually narrow up the state by 1.5 points from the 2024 presidential election. The state of Illinois is a super fascinating one on this map because it is only a 5.5 point win for Pete Buttigieg. Yes, it is only a 5.5 point win on this map. You can see here, Harris won it by 11 points, but given Pete Buttigieg's historically weak performance with Black voters, you are going to see a huge decrease for Pete Buttigieg in Cook County and the surrounding areas, and that is why Illinois will be in the likely Democratic column. Virginia stays in the likely Democratic column from 2024. It basically stays stagnant in its, shift, you can really see it actually shifts a little bit to the right, just a tiny bit, not really a lot. It's a 5.1 percentage point win for Pete Buttigieg in this map. Again, some of the rural areas would end up shifting, but some of the suburban Richmond areas once again would trend left. You would see in this map as well, Maryland, DC, Massachusetts, Vermont, these would all be safe states. Vermont would shift back a little bit towards the Democrats. Massachusetts actually gets slightly closer on this matchup, and we even see like Maryland gets 3 points closer, Delaware a little bit closer given the African-American trends, and Rhode Island would also be in the likely Democratic column at 12 points. Connecticut is only a 9-point win on the map here, which is really interesting, and this is mostly because of Catholics would be shifting to Vance because of Pete Buttigieg being the Democratic nominee. New York would also end up narrowing up quite significantly. Harris won it by 12 points. Here it is only an 8.5-point win for Pete Buttigieg, so in New York, he would actually suffer massively there as of right now. And that gives, Pete, 193 safe and likely electoral college votes to J.D. Vance's 219 safe and likely electoral college votes. You actually also see Arizona and Nevada are likely margins, with Arizona being a 10-point win. So it wouldn't really even be a swing state. And Nevada also really wouldn't be a swing state on the map either. It'd be a pretty significant shift to the right here. Maricopa would almost certainly shift to the right. Maricopa County and Clark County, Vance would almost certainly win that state as well. And so given that, you do have a pretty significant shift towards Republicans in these states because of the Hispanic vote. New Mexico only being a 3-point win, so this is half of the margin than what it was in the 2024 election when Harris won the state by exactly 6 percentage points. Looking once again towards other states, Minnesota is in the basically likely Democratic column. It does shift back a little bit towards Pete Buttigieg in some of these suburban areas. You do actually see, especially some of the retiree areas, you'd see Pete Buttigieg gain slightly in the state of Minnesota. And looking at some other areas, New Jersey, Harris won this by 5.9%. And that was way closer than Biden's 16-point win in 2020. Now it only shows up as a 3.9 percentage point win for Pete Buttigieg. Some of these suburban areas would shift left. Some of the Hispanic heavy, working class heavy areas would continue to move right. And thus you'd see New Jersey narrow up once again on this map as well. Looking at North Carolina and Georgia, two crucial swing states from 2024, you would see Georgia actually move to the left by about a point, but it would stay in the Republican column, and North Carolina would shift to the right by like 0.8%, and that puts J.D. Vance at 268 electoral college votes. New Hampshire was a 3-point win in 2024 for Kamala Harris. This time around, it's actually slightly closer. Vance actually gains in New Hampshire despite all odds, and this is because of the suburban shifts. You do see these massive shifts in suburban areas in either direction, but Vance on average would gain in suburban areas nationwide, and that helps him out in a state like New Hampshire, and doing fairly well with 18 to 34-year-olds is actually going to help him buck the trend in New Hampshire of it being a liberal Democratic state. Now, the final states that are remaining are the Rust Belt states from 2024, the same states that decided the presidential election last time around. Pennsylvania on this map will end up being a lean Republican state of 2 percentage points. So it's barely moving to the right from 2024. It's a very minimal shift. It basically ends up being the same state as last time, and it really doesn't budge either way. The final two states, which are in the till column, are Michigan and Wisconsin. They both go to JD Vance and Marco Rubio on the map, with Michigan being a 0.3 percentage point win and Wisconsin also being the same amount, with Wisconsin shifting less to the left than Michigan. Once again, you'd see some areas in the Wow County shift left, and even some northern areas like Bayfield County in Wisconsin would trend left. But in the the working class Iron Range, you would see these really big rightward shifts once again for Vance, and I think that's what ends up saving him in Wisconsin. In Michigan, once again, you'd see Vance improve in rural areas, improve in some suburban and city areas, but a lot of other suburban areas, Pete, would actually slightly improve in the electoral college there, and that would produce a tilt Michigan. And after all the results and all the votes are tallied up, you effectively get JD Vance at 312 electoral college votes to Pete Buttigieg's 226 electoral college votes. The closest state on the map, I believe, is Wisconsin. And if Wisconsin were to flip to the Democrats, you'd get Vance with 302 electoral college votes on the map. And this is the shift map. Here you clearly see that working class America does end up moving left given Trump's voters. A lot of Trump or die voters would kind of stay home, in my opinion. Even though Vance would retain most of the voters, I don't think all of them would stay on board, but Vance would pick up a new coalition of Hispanic and Black voters, which would end up helping him. And certain young and suburban voters, I think Vance would be able to build a technocratic, sort of Republican-esque coalition, and that's why he does better in some of the, southern parts of the country and certain parts of the Northeast. And Illinois is a pretty big exception in the Great Plains area to move right, given Pete's very bad weakness with Black voters, hence why he would pick Wes Moore as his VP nominee. But even then, I still think Vance ends up winning the Electoral College as of right now. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.